Shabbat Shalom. During the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, we read 3 of the most searing passages of the biblical prophets, 2 from Jeremiah and the 3rd from the first chapter of Isaiah. At no other time of the year are we so aware of the force of these visionaries. This, in spite of the fact that the prophets had no earthly power. They weren't kings, they weren't members of the royal court, they held no office, they weren't elected, and often they were deeply unpopular, none more so than Jeremiah. Prophets were typically ignored during their lifetimes, the one clear exception being Jonah. But the words of the prophets became a major feature of the Hebrew Bible. They were the world's first social critics, and their message echoes through the centuries. Uniquely, the prophets of Israel didn't foretell the future. The ancient world was full of such people. But Judaism has no time for this. In fact, the Torah bans people who practice divination, sorcery, witchcraft, or who consult the dead. These practices are banned because Judaism believes in human freedom. The future isn't set in stone. Everything depends on us and the choices we make. The prophets only tell what will happen if we don't mend our ways. The prophets of Israel don't predict, they warn. Several other things make the prophets of Israel unique. The first is their sense of history. The prophets were the first people to see God in history. We tend to take our sense of time for granted, but actually, there are several different ways of relating to time. There is cyclical time, the cycle of birth, growth, decline, and death. Cyclical time is time as it occurs in nature. Some trees have long lives, most fruit flies have short ones, but all that lives dies. The species endures, individual members do not. The book of Ecclesiastes expresses the concept of cyclical time in Judaism, when it says, "The sun rises and the sun sets, and then hurries back to where it rises again. What has been done will be done again, and there's nothing new under the sun." Then there's linear time. Time is a sequence of cause and effect. According to the French astronomer Pierre-Simon Laplace, if, and I quote, "one knows all forces that set nature in motion, and all positions of all items of which nature is composed, together with all the laws of physics and chemistry, then nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before our eyes." This idea, applied to the affairs of humankind, amounts to a massive denial of personal freedom. And finally, there's time as a mere sequence of events, with no underlying plot or theme. This leads to the kind of historical writing that first appeared in ancient Greece, with historians Herodotus and Thucydides. Each of these has its place, the first in biology, the second in physics, the third in secular history. But the prophets of Israel see time as the stage on which the great drama between God and humanity plays out, especially in the history of Israel. If Israel is faithful to its mission, it flourishes. If not, it suffers defeat and exile. This is what Jeremiah never tired of telling the people of Israel. The second prophetic insight is the connection between monotheism and morality. Somehow, the prophets sense that idolatry isn't just false, it's also dangerous. It sees the universe as a multiplicity of powers that often clash. The battle goes to the strong. Might defeats right. It's survival of the fittest while the weak perish. The prophets oppose this with all their might. For them, the power of God is strictly secondary. What really matters is the righteousness of God. Precisely because God loves and redeems Israel, Israel owes him their loyalty. And if they are unfaithful to God, ultimately they will also be unfaithful to their fellow human being. They would lie, rob, and cheat. Jeremiah even doubts whether there is one honest person in the whole of Jerusalem. The third great insight of the prophets of Israel is the primacy of ethics over politics. The prophets have surprisingly little to say about politics. Instead, we hear a constant insistence that the strength of a nation isn't military or demographic, but rather moral and spiritual. If the people keep faith with God and with one another, no force on earth can defeat them. If they do not, no force can save them. As Jeremiah says in this week's Haftarah, they'll discover too late that their false gods can only offer false comfort. Jeremiah, the most passionate and tormented of all the prophets, has gone down in history as the prophet of doom. But the truth is, he was also a prophet of hope. He's the one who says that the people of Israel will be as eternal as the sun, moon, and stars. He's the one who, while the Babylonians were laying siege to Jerusalem, buys a field as a public gesture of faith that we would return from exile. Jeremiah's feelings of doom and hope actually weren't in conflict. They actually were two sides of the same coin. The God who punished his people with exile would be the God who brought them back. Even though his people might forsake God, God would never forsake them. Jeremiah may have lost faith in people, but he never lost faith in God. Israelite prophecy came to an end with Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi in the Second Temple era. But the prophetic truths have not ceased and will never cease to be true. Only by being faithful to God do people stay faithful to one another. Only by being open to a power greater than themselves do people become greater than themselves. Only by understanding the deep forces that shape history can a people defeat the ravages of history. It took a long time for biblical Israel to learn these truths, and a very long time before they returned to their land, re-entering the arena of history. We would do very well never to forget these truths again. Shabbat Shalom.